don't mess around when it comes to embracing the complex beingness of whoever is in their presence. They weave their lived experiences with intentional relationships, ceremony, creative arts, chronic illness, and embracing pleasure seamlessly with a whole lot of love and a good bit of magic into all they offer. They will be speaking on The Rivers We Are. We will follow the sermon with a moment of silence for those who wish to reflect.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me into your space. When I was approached to talk with you all about animism as a spiritual practice, I had to pause and really consider how to talk about it. For me, talking about animism is like trying to talk about air, or more appropriately, like a fish trying to talk about the water. It is what I swim in. It is so ingrained in my worldview that it can be kind of hard to tease apart from the everyday acts of living and being in the world. My thoughts and beliefs have been formed over the years, shaped by my experiences, learnings, and observations, and deep conversations. I wanted to start in the spirit of Adrienne Marie Brown, and by talking about where some of this practice for me came from. It's come from long conversation over cups of tea with my mentors, Raven Caldera and Susanna Ravenswing, and in spirited debates with my dear friend and writing companion, Julie Woods. It's come from conversations with my dear friend, the Dandelion Lady, Mel Hill, who is my co-conspirator, while we fold laundry and sing to the river, perform rituals and make art together and feed our families. There are the thinkers and the authors, Robin Wall Kimmerer, Thich Nhat Hanh, Tyson Yunkaporta, the water protectors at Standing Rock, Octavia Butler and N.K. Jemisin, Sophie Strand and Rachel Carson, to name a few of the people who have formed how I think about this. They opened my senses and gave me words to begin describing what I could feel in the world around me. I thought that talking about a fish to water, about water, led me to think about water, specifically my relationship with particular waters. I live near where I grew up in mid-Michigan, though I moved away several times between here and then. The area is traversed by, and you might say, defined by a couple of waterways. I live quite near the watershed of Sycamore Creek, which flows into the Red Cedar River, and then just up the way where the Red Cedar flows into the Grand River. As my local watershed is defined by these waterways, so too is my spiritual relationship defined by them. My working animism definition of animism is roughly the world is alive and full of spirits. In its practice, animism is shaped by my relationships, by the interrelating of many beings, only some of whom are human shaped. There are bird people, rock people, tree people. There are mountain people and wind people. There are river, lake, and ocean people. Animism is interacting with these beings as they have lives and spirits, with respect and reverence. It is expressed through both ceremony and through everyday living. Over 70% of the world is covered in water, more than half of it. Most people can't live more than 3 days without water. Each of our bodies is more than half water. Access to clean, safe drinking water is essential to our well-being as living beings. I could talk all morning about how important clean water is to us, how much of a social justice and equity issue it is, and I don't think that would be news to any of us. What I want for us today is to feel into what our relationship with water is like. Each of us has different experiences that shape how we see the world. Do you love to swim? Do you get scared by big water? Do you have safe drinking water at home? When was the last time you washed your hands? Do you remember lying next to a river and to listen to it run by? Maybe fishing with a beloved relative? tucked safe somewhere listening to the rain falling outside, or being caught in a downpour and wondering if you were ever going to be dry again, or watching floodwater rise and wondering if everyone you loved is safe. Each of these experiences shapes our relationship with water, the waters that literally run through us. Humans have spent centuries learning the engineering skills to tame rivers, to use them to serve us. This is how one acts when one is divorced from the reality that humans are but one of the many beings inhabiting the world. It is what happens when we feel disconnected from the world, when we feel isolated. It is what happens when we forget or we're never shown what it means to be part of an ecosystem and part of our world. What would be possible if we honored the landscape as a living matrix of beings, balanced in a perfect wholeness, as meaning and value beyond usefulness? What would be possible when we remember as a collective that we are together, and as Carl Sagan put it, together on this pale blue dot? In Norse cosmology, which is something that I spend a lot of time with, the world was created in one of the stories from the body of the first giant Ymir. Their bones became the earth and the mountains. Their blood literally became the water of the world. And I think a lot about this, about how the shape of the veins in our bodies mimics the shapes of the rivers that run through our land. That no matter what cosmology any of us believes in, each of us literally carries the elements of creation within us. Our bodies literally constructed from elements that are cycled and recycled between beings. When I drink a glass of water, partaking in the relationship that I share with my watershed, those molecules end up in me, making me a being that is talking with you today. As we go through the process of decolonizing ourselves, our minds, our bodies, our spirits, and emotions, it can be really intense and it can hurt. It can hurt to realize what we have done and where we may be doing harm. It can hurt to start looking at the places where we have felt harm, where we have experienced it. It can hurt to look at the places where we have hurt others and maybe abandoned ourselves or our relations, where we have suppressed, buried, ignored, or turned away from connection because it hurt too much for us to bear. It can bring up a lot of grief and rage and anger and sadness. It can be numbing and frustrating. If you're feeling any of these things, it's normal. I want to assure you that whatever you are feeling about this is normal. So take a moment. Take a nice deep breath in. Feel again where you are supported by gravity, where you are literally held upright by your connection to the world, where you are held by the earth and the atmosphere, where your blood runs as rivers in your veins. It is at these times we turn to others who are doing the hard work. We seek those to live with rather than those who seek to live over. It is a long arc, walking slowly back to ourselves, crawling when we need to, flying where we can, carrying each other, leaning on each other when it is too much to bear. That is what it is to be in community. Choosing to turn back into connection, choosing repair, where we can name the hurts, be seen and validated, where we can choose to walk differently in the world. And it's not easy. And I don't mean to imply that it is. I think of my hometown, East Lansing, Michigan, where I grew up in the late 80s and early 90s. And the main waterways, the Grand River, the Red Cedar, and Sycamore Creek, that cradle the watershed, were unsafe for humans or animals. They were full of trash and waste. They were choked with sewer runoff and industrial pollution. stories every year of ill-advised people who went swimming or got sick from the bacteria that lived in the waste of the rivers. I think about how weird it was that just falling into a river could make you sick. What a sad thing. This water, this being that runs through the heart of our town, was so sick that it made others sick. And that maybe making the human sick was the only way it could think of to be heard, the only way they could be heard. It was on Earth Day in 1972 when the water cleanup started. And it wasn't for another 25 years that the birds started coming back. I think what a big deal it was that the great blue herons and the bald eagles started coming back to build their nests. What it meant that the water didn't make people sick if they fell in. What it meant when literally just this morning I was looking at some of the news from home, and the lake sturgeon are starting to come back. The fish are coming back to breed. What does it mean for the relationship between all of these beings that shared this area, that maybe we have a chance to live with each other instead of in spite of each other? Thinking about all of this led me to think about how we talk about it. For much of human history, there wasn't a term for animism. There wasn't a term for this. It isn't so much a theory or an idea, it's a lived experience felt in one's being and through everyday interactions. And that's animism. We had to build a word for it because we had forgotten how to talk about it. If we don't have the words to describe something, how can we talk to each other about it? How can we create a shared vision of what we want to be? How do we dream of something different? Dream something into being? How do we speak of our neighbors, those beings that we exist alongside, if we don't even have the words to describe what we are experiencing? How we talk about things matters. And in this, I turn to the words of Robin Wall Kimmerer in her essay, Speaking of Nature. I'm going to quote her. Can we unlearn the language of objectification and throw off colonized thought? Can we make a new world with words? Inspired by the grammar of animacy and Potawatomi, I've been thinking and searching for a new expression that could be slipped into the English language in place of it when we are speaking of living beings. I sought the counsel of my elder and language guide, Stuart King, and explained my purpose in seeking a word to instill animacy in the English grammar, to heal the disrespect. He rightly cautioned that our language holds no responsibility to heal the society that sought to exterminate. With deep respect for his response, I thought also of how the teachings of traditional wisdom might one day be needed as medicine for a broken world. So I asked him if there was a word in our language to capture the simple but miraculous state of being, of just being. And there is. Aki Mansi Wasiwan, he said, means a being of the living earth. And I sighed with relief and gratitude for the existence of that word. They did not slide easily into English to take place of the pronoun it. And I wondered if that first sound, the one that came to me as I walked over the land, with full recognition and celebration of Potawatomi roots, we might hear a new pronoun at the beginning of the word, from Aki, that means land. Ki to signify a being of living earth, not he or she, but ki. So that when the robin warbles on a summer morning, we can say Ki is singing of the sun. Ki runs through the branches on squirrel feet. Ki howls at the moon. Ki's branches sway in the pine-scented breeze. All are live in our language as in our. Our words can be an antidote to human exceptionalism, to unthinking exploitation, an antidote to loneliness, and opening to kinship. If we can make the world, can this little sound call back the grammar of animacy? And I read that essay when I read Robin Wall Kimmerer's words and thought about having a word to describe the world around us and the beings we share it. And in feeling her words, I felt myself reaching back into my memories, those days walking along the river when suddenly I knew I wasn't alone, that I knew I was in the presence of beings, other beings, many of them. And that feeling of presence led me explore how I could communicate with them, how I might learn what key we're trying to say. What happens when we start looking at the world through this lens? What happens if the river shifts in our vocabulary to a person in key's own right, with opinions and agency? The world shifts in fundamental and radical ways when you start looking at it through the lens of personhood. And then I started looking through the lens of personhood in a self-aware way, and it was completely overwhelming, to say the least. I was overwhelmed by the enormity of these thoughts, and I felt I might truly be lost to despair if I had to think about it all day, every day. Looking at a plate of food and thinking about each being involved, and then each human that grew, tended, harvested, cooked, or transported something, each blade of grass and mushroom, each vegetable and animal, the pollinator bees, the waterways, the winds and the clouds, the sun, the moon, and the stars. The immensity of the connection was awesome in both the beautiful and terrifying definitions of the word. And rather than resolving into order and clarity, ever closer examination revealed only more and more splendid detail, complexity, interrelation, and variation. The way, though, through the overwhelm of all of it can be to root deeply into connection, to breathe it in, to witness it, to be moved by it, to allow it to support and believe. The rivers don't want or need what a human wants or needs. The river doesn't mind sharing Key's bounty with the rest of the trees along its banks or the fish in it. We can open into conversation with these beings. We can come form a compassionate, caring, reverent place, entering with curiosity and wondering, a space of kinship and belonging, a space of community. What would it be like for us to speak more like the river, more like the lichen or the stone or the wind or the falling rain? To operate consciously at a different scale, at a different pace. To quote Ursula K. Le Guin, what would it be to experience the meter of eternity? What kind of relationships might we foster if we tuned in and learned to listen to the kin that we share the world with, that share the world with us? What does the river want? What does the person living next to the river want? What does the tree on the banks want? What does the watershed want? Coming into relationship and asking ourselves what being part of an ecosystem means. It means, for me, respect and care of my fellow beings. What if we formed these relationships with care and deliberation that we brought to friendship? I would invite all of us to try walking for a day with respect for all beings. Slow down to the pace of noticing. How would you treat your first glass of water with respect? How would you treat the person you pass on the street with respect? How would you treat the aquifer that you drink from with respect? How would you treat yourself with respect? Some days I go to the river to walk along the banks and pick up trash as I go, scattering native wildflower seeds in the park. Some days I sing counterpoint to the rapids, and maybe the birds nesting on the bank reply with their song in turn. Other times, I go and I sit through seemingly endless council meetings, advocating for our local greenways project and the rain gardens to filter and replenish the groundwater locally. It's not easy. And I have a saying on the wall that as I was writing this that I kept looking at. It's not a perfect, it is a practice. It's about showing up and trying and experimenting and ultimately transforming the ways in which we interact with the world, even when we are constantly adapting to a changing horizon. We are all just doing our best. One breath, one glass of water, one flower seed at a time. I wanted to close with the Waters of Life invocation by my friend Mel Hill. All waters are one. The water that flowed from this tap is the water that flowed from the pipe, is the water that flowed from the aquifer, is the water that flowed from the river, is the water that flowed from the ocean, is the water that flowed from the sky, is the water that flowed from the sacred well where all the gods reside. All waters are one. Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you have a lovely day.